Right. What a beautiful crowd. Happy Monday morning. Nice to see you all. My name is Jean Hamilton. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Land Access and Opportunity Board. And today you all get to experience me for my very first time being an MC. So I'm very excited and also very nervous. I had dreams all night about clothes that didn't fit me. I had a lot of anxiety about what I was going to wear today. So thanks. Thank you. Let's see, a couple of just quick housekeeping things. The bathroom, I'm supposed to say where the bathroom is, but I don't actually know. It's that way. There's two. Yeah, that way and that way. Okay. Perfect. I assume you can always ask for help. What is the Wi-Fi situation? Okay. Speaker. Okay. The password is speaker. I think it's Hilton something. Hilton Honors Meeting. Does anyone feel worried about finding the Wi-Fi, or are you all good? Okay. Great. Oh, you're worried. Okay. We will help you. We got this. If you need help with anything, please ask someone for help. One of your colleagues here at the table, one of just anyone. This is a very open and welcoming space. So please don't be shy. Let me see. I will speak right into it. Is that better? Okay. Yes. What else did I want to tell you all in terms of housekeeping? In terms of housekeeping, I would like to thank the sponsors of this event. First to VNRC, Preservation Trust of Vermont, and AARP, who I think really conceived of this event. So if those representatives would stand up, we'd love to give you a hand. Yay. As always, community takes many helping hands, so I will go ahead and tell you who else has contributed to this event. The Ben & Jerry's Foundation, my organization, the Land Access and Opportunity Board, White and Burke, Community National Bank, Fuss and O'Neill, SRH Law, and the Necrason Group. So let's give a hand to all of them. And then there are many people who've contributed to the thinking that went into this event. So advisory committee, if you could please stand up proudly so we can clap for you and all of your genius. Please stand up, advisory committee. Okay. Great. So Katie, I'd love to invite you up and help us set the goals for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Hi, everyone. So my name is Katie Gallagher. I work with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, directing our Sustainable Communities program. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Am I speaking loud enough? Okay, great. So just wanted to go over what we were hoping to accomplish today, and hope we're on the same page about it. But as the planning team discussed what we were hoping this event would accomplish, we settled on the following things. I'm narrowing this down, and there's a lot of things we wanted to accomplish. But we wanted to reflect on where and how Vermont's smart growth framework has served it well, and how it could evolve to meet people where they are today and address our current social, economic, and environmental context, which we all know is crazy right now, right? And while things are really crazy right now, we also wanted to build excitement and enthusiasm for land use planning as a kind of linchpin for a vital rural community, affordability, livability, housing, a healthy environment, all of these things that are so deeply complex but interconnected. We wanted to provide a platform to discuss this complex system that produces our land use and development pattern, and to raise difficult questions, and to find common ground that would help us to break down these siloed conversations around land use that we've been having, and again, try and bring us together to move forward in a really positive and productive way. So on that last point, I just want to recognize, and we're going to talk more about it, but For some in this room, I'm sure that today's conversation might be a little uncomfortable as we try to kind of move out into new spaces that we haven't really visited in a while. But for others, we want to recognize that this conversation has been uncomfortable for a while and might not have been welcoming of everybody. So our hope is that this event will serve as a foundation for continued relationship building and dialogue, and that we all leave here today having learned something new about how others think about our collective goals around land use, and how we can think about how we work together to achieve our goals of having healthy and thriving communities. So, if I can move the next slide. Let's see if this works. Maybe. Yes, please. Technology is never as easy as you think it would be. Okay, so just want to reflect first, really quickly, who's in the room here. We asked you all to share where you're coming from in terms of your background today. So as you can see, the colors are a little bit close together here, but we have a range of folks coming from economic development fields, housing and development, working lands, transportation, planners, health and human services, and environmental groups. Next slide, please. Can you see if the next, okay, we'll start here. Because I just talked about what our hopes for the day were. So I just want to reflect, and sorry, the text is a little small here, but what we heard from you all as to what you hope to get out of today. So just a couple things and themes that we pulled out of the feedback that we received from the survey that we sent out earlier. Folks are looking for some action and advocacy, which is fantastic. Ideas of how to balance development and conservation, support for density and civic vibrancy, identifying practical solutions to these challenges related to development and smart growth, clarifying key concepts, understanding community awareness of these concepts, insights and co-development of actionable ideas and strategies, and networking and idea sharing. So hopefully we will touch on all of those things. So go back, one more to the agenda. So our agenda today, we are at the welcome section. After this, we are going to move into our opening panel. So we are very lucky to have really fantastic panelists today who will speak to a couple different key topics related to smart growth and land use in general. So we wanted to do kind of a setting the groundwork for where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. We'll also have some opportunity for engagement during that panel as well. Then we're going to take a quick break. During that break, feel free to get more coffee, grab some snacks, check out the historical timeline and contribute to it. And then we will move into our facilitated breakout groups, which will take up most of the rest of the day. So these are going to be really active conversations. There will be a 10-minute break in between them, but also please feel to take care of your needs, as you need to throughout the day. We'll have lunch. It'll be buffet style in the back of the room here, so no need to go into any other rooms. Then we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about what those small group discussions produced. What did we talk about? What did we learn? What do we want to make sure we don't drop? And what do we want to make sure we carry forward? And then we will wrap up with opportunities for action and next steps. So I think with that, I am going to pass it over to Ornella, who's going to help walk us through guidelines for making sure that we have positive and productive conversations today. Thank you.
Buenos dias. Good morning. How are we doing? Thank you so much for being here today. Let's take a breath and land for a moment as I look at everyone. I am Ornella Mata Figueroa, co-director of the Land Access and Opportunity Board with Jean. And everywhere we land, we start with these touchstones. And I'd like to share them with you all today as the beginning of our agreement setting. We listen generously. We speak our truth from our heart and mind. We make the way that we work together an example of what is possible. And we trust that we all hold a piece of the puzzle, and we need each other's pieces to understand the whole picture. Do we all consent to working with these touchstones today? Yes. Thank you so much. We've learned, after doing this for a year, that it matters that we have a little bit of a conversation about what does it look like when we embody these touchstones. And we are going to be breaking out into smaller groups and having some difficult conversations that are going to make us have a lot of different feelings, because there's going to be different opinions at the tables, because maybe there's going to be ideas that we haven't heard before. Because there's people that may feel new to this conversation coming in to have a conversation when you may have been a part of this for 20, 30, 40 years. And that can feel hard. So we are having a little bit of, we just want to share right in your workbooks, all of the information is there with all of the different, what I'm calling the start of our Smarter Growth Summit agreements. Yes, thank you. We're asking for folks to try to not interrupt one another when we're working in the small groups. I read differently recently that interrupting is a form of bullying. Not always, but sometimes it is. And I want us to check that urge to interrupt and ask ourselves, why am I wanting to not listen to the other person? We're going to listen actively. There's a little bit of an information sheet that we use sometimes, or there was, I don't know if they took it. Yep, it's there, about deep listening. So we're listening actively, we're listening deeply to one another. We're listening to what is said, we're listening to what is not being said, and we're paying attention to what folks in our groups are saying and to our own bodies and what we want to say. Be mindful of your total talk time. And if you're comfortable, speak up and add to the conversation. Make room, take room, give everyone a chance to speak without unnecessary pressure. Whoops. Understand that we're all learning. We are all learning. We are all going to make mistakes. And we apologize. We recognize and embrace friction. There's going to be conflict, and conflict is generative. Conflict is the birthplace of creativity, as is boredom. But we're not going to talk about that here. We're going to play, and we're going to be, and we're going to embrace the conflict as a place where we can create together. I give credit where it's due. If you're echoing someone else's ideas, give appropriate credit. Ask for clarification. If there's something that kind of feels unsettling, let's just ask one another, what do you mean by that? I'm understanding that this is what you're trying to say. Is this correct? Speak for yourself and use I statements. Words and tone matter. Be mindful of the impact of what you say and not just your intent. Okay? Are there any other agreements that folks want to add to the list? There's a sheet right afterwards in your workbook for folks to add anything else. Is there some other agreement that would make folks here feel good about engaging in a difficult conversation? Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Any other thing that we want to share to make sure that we feel safe having this conversation? Okay. Thank you so much. Katie alluded to this when Katie was giving the introduction. But one thing we like to point out is that often it feels uncomfortable to have difficult conversations, and that safety and discomfort are different. And when we're trying to prioritize justice in spaces, kind of working through that feeling of discomfort is necessary. So we're going to encourage folks to ask for support if something feels really uncomfortable. Give us the opportunity to have a dialogue and a conversation, and let's create these beautiful, smarter goals of the future. Start the process today together. Thank you.
All right, can I please have our panelists come to the front of the room and give them a loud round of applause? Thank you. Okay, let's see. I'm getting oriented here. A couple things I just want you to know is this is going to be you've heard it's interactive. It's also going to be physically interactive. Like after the panel, we're going to move tables together. We are going to practice co-creation, and we're going to play together. I'm going to do my best to keep us on time, and so there may be moments where it's like the timekeeping feels a little aggressive, and that is because we want to hold a container that gives you plenty of space to play within and not worry about the time. There's also some things on your table you can literally play with. So if you think better while manipulating things with your hands, I really encourage you to dive into those little plastic bags that look bizarre. Okay, so we have a panel here. I am very excited to meet you all and hear what you have to share with us. The goal of our panel is really to like set the tone, set the foundation for these nitty-gritty conversations that you're gonna have in small groups around the table. We're gonna have some folks who have thought a lot about smart growth, potentially for decades, or in more recent time in different contexts, to kind of help get us some familiarity of shared terms and where are we now. Ben, I believe you're going to come up here and help us set the stage for this panel. Is that right? Okay. Okay, please come on up, Ben.
Sorry, I'll be brief. Good morning, everyone. My name's Ben Doyle. I'm the president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. For those of you who are unfamiliar with PTV, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to foster community through the preservation of historic buildings, villages, and downtowns. I've been asked to say a few words about where we are and why we are here, and I feel like Katie's already done a remarkable job of doing that. But one of the reasons I'm here is actually to commend VNRC's Katie Gallagher for the great work she has done in putting this event together and for refocusing our attention on the importance of smart growth principles. Thank you for your leadership, Katie. So just a few other remarks. I would say historic preservationists are optimistic by nature. We believe that there are things worth saving, and in fact that they can be saved. And we tend to take the long view. Vermont's historic downtowns have always evolved and adapted over time, but they were originally built with intention. Schools, businesses, places of worship, homes, and industry, all within walking distance, surrounded by the working landscape. That relationship between the walkable built environment and the working landscape has shaped Vermont for generations. And for more than 30 years, smart growth principles have helped establish and codify land use policies that maintain that balance. The smart growth movement in Vermont has led to policies and investments that have directly supported the revitalization and livability of our historic community centers, while balancing the state's rural identity, economic development, and environmental protection. In the field of preservation, you hear the word character a lot. I'm not talking about when people call Chris Cochran from ACCD a character. I'm talking about character as in the character-defining features of a building that deem it worthy of preservation, or the idea that we need to maintain Vermont's rural character. The word character in this context presumably refers to aesthetics, but I think we all know that for better or worse, the word character has a deeper meaning. What we're really talking about are values. Values like respect for nature, sustainability, financial responsibility, community, freedom, unity. But at times, the values expressed in service to preserving character can do harm. Values like provincialism, prejudice, division. Today, we're going to have a conversation about smart growth policy in Vermont, what it has accomplished, and what it could look like moving forward. But we will also be having a conversation about values. Our values define development. Development defines place. Place defines community. Community defines us. I once worked for a concrete contractor in Wheelock, Vermont. Every day, we would set up forms that concrete would be poured into for the foundation of future buildings. It was a tough job. The forms were heavy, and we worked in all kinds of weather, and we were in and out of cellar holes all day long. But I'll never forget the advice of my boss, Buzzy Barnes, who had been pouring concrete for 30 years and could outwork any of us on the crew. He always said, work smarter, not harder. By that, he meant think, plan, move with intention, play the long game. I ask you to think about this moment in time. We have a political system that lurches further and further towards extremism, a housing crisis, an economy that is broken for working people, and climate change-induced floods that threaten our communities in a multitude of ways. Inaction is not an option, and dumb actions will exacerbate our problems. Remember when I said that preservationists are optimistic by nature? Ernest Shackleton, the famous Arctic explorer, said that optimism is the highest form of courage. I look around this room today and I see smart people, people with character, people with courage. Now is the time to be brave, to be bold, to work smarter and harder, to shape and reshape the policies and initiatives that reflect our values and will determine Vermont's futures, to revitalize our communities through those values. That's why we're here. That's where we are. Enjoy the day.
Thank you so much, Ben. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to the panel here. And I think we have an order. So, Brian, can I have you introduce yourself first and tell us a little bit about what you know about smart growth?
Thanks, Jean. Well, when Katie asked me to be on the panel, I asked her what my role is, and she said, "Oh, you're the old guy." Thanks, Katie. So I came to Vermont as a young planner in the late 1980s. I served as the executive director of the Mad River Valley Planning District, and then I was a planning director in Stowe and was a consultant for several years working around the state, and then kind of switched jobs and worked at VNRC for about 15 years, most of that time as the executive director. And we advocated for a lot of land use policy, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but always with a lens towards smart growth. So what Katie asked me to do is kind of give a little bit of a history lesson of how smart growth showed up in Vermont, what its origins are, and how it's been used in policy making and decision making in the state. And Ben mentioned the concept of compact settlements, compact downtowns surrounded by open countryside. That's been a reoccurring theme in Vermont's planning history since at least the middle of the last century. That concept of compact settlements surrounded by countryside is really a smart growth concept. And it was first put into law in the late 1980s when Act 200 was passed. And Act 200 was a result of concern over rapid development in the state that was bringing a lot of change and development patterns that were pretty land consumptive, were not efficient, were exclusionary in some respects, and that they didn't provide housing options or transportation options. So the legislature passed Act 200 to encourage municipal planning and regional planning in the state. And they actually adopted a bunch of planning policies and goals that planning needed to comply with. And that included that concept of compact development surrounded by open countryside, housing options, transportation options, land conservation of our working lands. And that was kind of the basis of a smart growth policy for the state. Around the same time, nationally, there was a real movement to address concerns that the systems in place that managed development, that controlled land development and how communities were developing, were forcing communities to be land consumptive, to be automobile oriented, to be energy inefficient. So a lot of planners and designers and architects came together and kind of formed what was called the New Urbanism movement, and they formed the Congress of New Urbanism as a way to shape development in a way that respected those historic patterns that have been talked about. And that was really the kind of the birth of the smart growth movement in my mind. And it was really a national movement. During the 90s, the Congress for New Urbanism was formed. A group in California put together what were called the Awani principles, which were the first, I think, real smart growth principle that were drafted. And that really took hold in the Clinton administration, where the Environmental Protection Agency was doing a lot of sustainable communities work and promoting smart growth. And then the American Planning Association in the late 90s put out a guidebook for model statutes for planning and the management of change, Growing Smarter. So there was a real movement to have state policy reflect smart growth principles. Probably the most significant thing that happened in Vermont also in the late 90s was a guy named John Ewing, who's a former bank president and former chair of the Environmental Board, and Beth Humstone, who was a longtime planner in the state, got together and formed the Vermont Forum on Sprawl. And they wanted to be a clearinghouse and a forum to bring development interest, environmental interest, housing interest together to talk about how to have policy changes that could reflect smart growth principles. Their first action was to hold a downtown conference, brought a lot of folks together. I think it was in partnership with the Dean administration, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and Preservation Trust of Vermont. And that was really birthed the downtown designation program in the state that has been hugely successful. They went on to form Smart Growth Collaborative with about a dozen other organizations, including Preservation Trust, Housing Vermont, and some other transportation groups, and really pushed a lot of policy research and public education around what are the causes of sprawl, how do we promote smart growth, how do we remove obstacles to smart growth. And in the 2006, 2007, the state, after following up the downtown designation program with other designation programs, I think Jake is going to talk about, the state enacted a growth center program, and that put into statute the smart growth principles that are in your information packet. Those principles are kind of unique in that they not only define what smart growth is, but they define what it's not. And that was an attempt to say, we do want to have smart growth, we do want to prevent sprawl from occurring in the state. Now, my time is up. We all were given 5 minutes so we can have conversation. But I do want to say that historically what happened is there was a lot of focus on smart growth in the state in the 2000s. And then when the recession hit, the Great Recession, it really kind of went away, and people's attention focused more on affordability and on economic development, and smart growth kind of waned as a policy. However, the fact that we had smart growth principles has carried forward in several different ways. I mentioned those planning and development goals that were adopted in the late 80s. They were actually amended to incorporate the smart growth principles into them as a planning framework for municipalities and regions. And then last year, when the state overhauled Act 250, the state land use and development law, they did something kind of unique and just said, we're going to have Act 250 apply differently in different areas. And what are the so-called Tier 1 areas where we want to have development, where we're not going to subject developers to Act 250 review, they have to be defined by regional planning commissions consistent with those smart growth principles. So the smart growth principles that were developed historically have a potential to play a real meaningful role in the implementation of all of our land use, community development, and economic development goals. So,
Thank you so much, Brian. That was
sorry
a lot.
I went over a little bit.
That's okay. Thank you.
Who's next?
If you could pass that on to Jake, please. Jake, welcome. Please introduce yourself. And I think you're going to tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground in terms of land development and policies and practices.
Thanks, Gene. And thanks to Ben at the Preservation Trust of Vermont and Kelly at AARP Vermont and Katie at VNRC. I look out at this crowd and I have a little bit of an imposter syndrome because there's so many amazing policy thinkers and leaders in this space in the room, and we all have our own story. My story coming to being a planner starts just growing up in a small town in Western Ohio. I lived in the village, and it was the type of place where I was a really free kid and could just bike around and feel like a king, going to my grandmother's house or going down to the corner store and buying candy or getting my first job at the 5 and dime store. And I grew up and realized, not all places are this awesome. And small towns aren't this awesome. So for me, I developed a connection to smart growth policies and really supportive communities. And to me, smart growth is all about convenience, being able to meet your daily needs without having to spend your life in a car getting around. It's about affordability, that we are able to provide public goods and services at a reasonable price because things are closer together and we can deliver those goods and services better. It's about connection with your neighbors, with your environment, and the ecosystems that support us. It's about safety and feeling supported in our community, and wellness, so we can be healthy. So that's what brought me to this work in this space, and I know all of you have your own story that brings you to this space and this work, and I think it's tremendously important that we continue to strengthen a framework that gives kids the same type of opportunities that I was so lucky to have growing up. Today in Vermont, we have a really robust planning framework. We've been doing it for more than 50 years, and we've developed habits. We've developed local experts and volunteers, and it's modernizing. But I think a criticism that we'll hear is that it's not modernizing fast enough for the rate of tremendous change that's happening in our state and community. We felt it with the pandemic. We are feeling it with the housing crisis and the new climate disasters that are facing our communities that Ben articulated so well. And related to that is that we can have the best planning and we can adapt it, but without a really good investment framework, our plans are not going to take life. And so that's where investments, the 3 points that I really wanted to make. So what do I say when we have a robust planning framework? We have in Vermont really strong state planning goals and smart growth principles that Brian articulated well and how they came to be in the state of Vermont. We have a lot of state agencies that are doing long range planning in very thoughtful ways related to energy, conservation, design, aging well. We have regional planning commissions, 11 of them, with regional plans that are guiding our land use and helping fill gaps in capacity throughout the state at the local level. And at the local level, we have about 80% of our communities are adopting municipal plans, 80% of those communities are regulating, and we have state development review at Act 250 that is filling the gap in places that are less planned for growth and for larger scale projects, as well as a lot of statewide environmental permits like shoreline protection or wetlands. And so this framework is what guides our land use and our outcomes. That framework is going through a big shift right now with Act 181. We're going to see much more consistent regional plans in the coming years. and those plans are going to go to a land use review board and be approved for use and recognition for investment purposes and for regulatory purposes. And it's leading us more towards a place-based investment framework. So we have those types of environments that kids can thrive in and people can thrive in, and all the needs get met. Also, we've seen a lot of work at the local level, modernizing bylaws, particularly with a focus on new homes and neighbors that we need so badly. And so that work is going to be rolling out over the next few years. The other thing that's happening is the investment framework is getting a close look at. We're taking a close look at that, and that includes the designations that have guided a lot of our smart growth investments: downtowns, villages, new town centers, growth centers, neighborhood development areas. These are all going to be transferring over to a simplified framework of centers and neighborhoods. And I think it's a tremendously exciting time to be having this conversation and to be in Vermont, because we can activate so much innovation to meet these great challenges that are before us.
Thank you so much, Jake. Pass that on to Kevin. Kevin, welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground in our communities within all of this policy and land use planning.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today and participating in this conversation. My name is Kevin Chu. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Futures Project. I grew up in Vermont. I want to grow old here too. I really mean that. I am in Vermont because my parents immigrated from Southeast China back in 1986, ended up in this beautiful state of all places because they had one social connection. I have an aunt that married an American, and they happen to have a home in Shelburne. So that's how my parents ended up here. Neither of them spoke English, neither of them had a college degree when they arrived, and they made that brave decision to leave behind everything they knew to come to a new place in search for economic opportunity. And I feel privileged to say that they were able to find that here and more. They found not only the American dream, but the Vermont dream. They found a community of people that wanted to help them succeed, and they were able to raise 3 boys, put them through college, purchase a home. I keep that story close when I do my work with the Vermont Futures Project. The Futures Project, our work tries to answer the mission question: how can we use data to support the evolution of Vermont's economy towards a thriving future full of opportunity for all? I think about whether or not someone like my parents, if they were to move to Vermont today, would they be able to achieve that same dream? And I think the odds are far less likely now than they might have been 20, 30, 40 years ago. So that was the motivation for the work of the Futures Project, to answer that mission question by developing a statewide economic action plan, which we just released about a month and a half ago. I'd be happy to share the link with Katie later, and then she can distribute it all to you. Behind that plan was this idea that Vermont's future depends on people and places. And many of the symptoms that we feel, the challenges, whether it's affordability, healthcare, education, finance, property taxes, even some of the challenges in terms of sustainability and equity, the root causes of these symptoms, most of that traces back to demographics and housing. So that places and people framework, it's not enough to just say we have a workforce shortage or we're in a housing crisis, but we really wanted to get to the next step and say, okay, let's quantify what that is, right? Because everywhere we go around the state, we'll hear people say those things. We have a housing crisis. Okay, how many houses do we need to build? We have a workforce shortage. How many people do we need? So that's what the plan tries to answer, and I'll set the stage by sharing some of those numbers. The Vermont Department of Labor projects about 17,150 retirements per year. Across the entire state, we have about 5,300 12th grade students. Those two numbers don't balance out. We don't retain 100% of those 12th graders, right? So in order to close that workforce gap, we need more people. Now, a lot of my work focuses on that piece of it. How do we balance that workforce equation? But I think there's an important part of the story that we can all do to tell about Vermont, which is not only does Vermont need more people, but more people need Vermont. And smart growth is one of the reasons why I say that, right? I see this state as a leader in terms of integrating multiple perspectives, economic perspective, environmental perspective, and the equity perspective. And to me, smart growth is an avenue to achieve progress in all three of those areas. My background is in environmental studies. I'll be the first one to tell you that I actually never took an econ class in college. Shh, please keep that quiet. And then had the privilege of working at the University of Vermont in the environmental program and the Rubenstein School of the Environment. So when I came to this Work of the Futures project and I really wanted to bring the environmental and equity perspectives to how I approach economic development. So with that, I'll share one more bit of information because I really appreciated how the stage was set to embrace productive discomfort. I think we need to acknowledge some of the history behind how we ended up here today. This is verbatim from a Brave Little State story about the history of Act 250. Another big concern is that Act 250 has contributed to the racial inequity in Vermont. And there's some indication that racist fears shaped the law from the very beginning. In the same speech when Governor Davis talked about desirable and undesirable development, he also warned about letting outsiders in and, quote, buy up our property and line our highways with fried chicken shacks. Later, in an interview the year before he died, Governor Davis described the 60s as a time when the nature of Vermont's population was changing. We were getting a rapid immigration into the state of people from high-density areas, and many of them with backgrounds that were quite dissimilar to what we would call the ordinary Vermonter in those days. Now, as I wrap up my time here, I'm actually going to turn the tables a bit and leave you with a question to think about. Who is Vermont for?
Thank you so much, Kevin. Yes, please pass on to Catherine. Catherine, thank you. Please introduce yourself and put Vermont in the context of other smart growth initiatives you see nationwide.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here, and thank you to this panel for starting today off and to everyone who's convened this event. I'm Catherine Burgess, and I'm with Smart Growth America. We're the national advocacy organization for smart growth, and we both conduct work at the federal level and seek to make connections across different states, looking for examples of innovation, best practice, and commitment to the issues. So my colleagues were really thrilled to hear about this event today, and I can't wait to report back to them after we've all had the chance to work together in the discussion groups. So Smart Growth America's goal is to support a country where no matter who you are or where you live, you can enjoy living in a place that's healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And when I picture that place, I picture somewhere where it is accessible, community-oriented, where you can reach your daily needs and high-opportunity jobs without having to rely on a car, where you have choices around what sort of housing unit you live in, and choices also as you age to live in different places at different times in life. And we really see this opportunity to better connect land use and housing and transportation and climate policy as key to addressing some of our, most pressing societal problems right now. First, it can support us in addressing the climate crisis, both in terms of mitigation, reducing our reliance on, household car ownership, and also in terms of climate adaptation, helping to direct development to areas that are less prone to environmental hazards. And I think we've all seen the extent of flood vulnerability in many of our communities over the past couple of years, but we also have to think about heat and all of the other types of climate hazards which can impact our infrastructure and people's lives. Next, we see smart growth as key to advancing racial equity and dismantling discriminatory housing and land use barriers. And we're looking for strategies to make it easier to develop affordable housing and housing of a range of tenures close to transportation and services. And there are decades and a frankly much longer history of discriminatory land use, which we see smart growth as a key strategy to address. And then finally, we see smart growth as key to improving community health. And I look at that quite broadly. Historically, we are talking about that as health in terms of encouraging active transportation, being able to get around by foot or on bike or using an assisted device more easily. But it's also about wellness and about community. And I love, Jake, how you started by talking about that, grounded community you grew up in. That's part of what I really love about living here. So I realized I jumped right in. I'm with a national organization, but live here in Montpelier. And just to have that opportunity to run into people spontaneously, to get to know your neighbors because you're, out running similar errands, it brings so much to quality of life and also ability to support each other during times of crisis, like the flood. Checking on neighbors after the flood, that is easier and more intuitive when you already know each other pretty well. And with Women's Day last week, our team was looking at, articles and whatnot. There was a great study recently showing how the level of caregiver stress is reduced when you're able to get around and support your family's needs without having to be stuck behind a stressful wheel all the time. And so that's something that I certainly relate to personally. So I'll bring the national perspective on the movement and say that our organization's focus has evolved a lot in the last 10 years or so. Think about 10, 15 years ago, smart growth advocates were really trumpeting increased property values by infrastructure investments as a sort of standalone win versus looking more critically at, how can the creation of real estate value near transportation and through transit-oriented development serve everyone and serve the community members who've been here for a long time? How can smart growth more proactively support affordable development in high quality and accessible locations? And also, how can we advocate for more of these locations, more transportation dollars? So that's a little bit of how we as an organization have looked in. Looking nationally, seeing smart growth principles embedded at the state level really does put Vermont as a leader on the national stage, but there is so much more that needs to be done. The housing access crisis is a horrific issue nationally, and Vermont has some of the worst stats here in terms of rental vacancies, in terms of the number of community members that are unhoused. So it's really especially urgent here, even with the supportive policy framework, to do more. Looking nationally, there are a lot of interesting ideas bubbling up in other states. I'm sure people are aware of the Massachusetts housing bond bill last year, which put a pretty ambitious dollar value investment towards housing, but also had some other ideas within there that could be relevant here, like a seasonable communities designation, looking to be even more proactive in locations with a lot of vacation and seasonal activity. California has some interesting approaches around multifamily by right in transit-ready corridors, so trying to create future transit-oriented development, which doesn't need to be rail. It can be bus. It can, there's a lot of quicker investments that can make a big difference. So with that, I'll wrap up to say, we're certainly, as an organization that conducts work at the federal level in a very volatile environment at the moment, and so it's especially important to have leadership at the state level, and I'm really excited to be here working together with all of you today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a little quick. Okay, I want the crowd to know, the audience to know that there's going to be time for you to be involved. So you should be jotting down notes as you're listening for what are you hearing that resonates with you? What do you hear as missing from the conversation, both from these introductions and as we move into questions? So in your notebooks, there's actually like a notes page, and hopefully you have pens. You can, as I have, used my notebook for note taking. So really encourage you to be actively listening here. Wow, okay, so already I love there's some generative tension here. It's very exciting. I heard in listening to your introductions that Vermont stands out in its land use planning. Like we have a lot of our towns have plans, town plans and zoning. We are making greater progress in terms of the sophistication of our planning. But at the same time, we are facing some crises that we all feel. Kevin, I really felt it when you said we need more people and more people need Vermont. So I'm curious about this, is there a gulf between our success in land use planning and our ability to meet the needs of our communities? And yeah, just curious to hear you, Jake, maybe starting with you, if I can put you on the spot to talk, because you were like, yes, we have so much good planning. Is planning gonna get us there, or what's sort of falling through the cracks even as we have excellent land use planning?
I think one of the big challenges comes to how we implement our plans, and particularly it relates to infrastructure. So the plans are only as good as our implementation programs are, and the scale of Vermont government makes implementation a challenge. Most of our towns are small. Most of them have populations under 3,000. Most of them don't actively pursue long-term capital planning, where they're looking at their buildings and facilities, their land acquisitions, their infrastructure investments, and so I think that's a real point for how can we get better about welcoming people into our communities, because what we're seeing right now on the ground is largely a lot of single-family home development on large lots that are unaffordable to most Vermonters, and large apartment buildings in the 40 unit range. And prior to the pandemic, we were actually seeing a loss of a lot of missing middle housing types that allow people to incrementally step up or adapt to different needs over the course of their life, whether that be a duplex or a quadplex or a townhouse or a condo. So the big challenge that I think is before us is, how do we move beyond that dead end subdivision with large lots that's off a country road, and think more deliberately about new neighborhoods that are next to our downtowns and our villages and our centers, and how can we harmonize our infrastructure investments in much smarter ways to make that possible. We can look at Summit Properties, their new development, I think it's called Stonecrop Meadows in Middlebury, as a success in Vermont, but we don't have enough successes like that. And it took a lot of subsidy to get there, and it took a lot of local capacity to get there. So,
Thank you. Catherine, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Or Kevin? Oh.
I'm happy to add to that. So, in an interview with Vermont Edition, I was speaking with Michaela Lafrac last year. She described the work of the Futures Project as a think tank, and it's just such a funny phrase to me, and I never use it to describe our work, but I said to her, we need to go from being a think tank to being a do tank. And I think that's the missing piece. It's implementation. When I look at this phrase, smart growth, we've got plenty of smart in the state, but we haven't had a lot of growth, right? That's the missing piece. So I mentioned the economic action plan earlier. One of the goals in that is to grow Vermont's population to 802,000 by 2035, and that scares a lot of folks, right? And that number wasn't just picked for the area code, but it was meant to close this workforce gap. Again, we have data, we can quantify what that gap is and set goals appropriately. But to get to 802,000, I'm going to reframe that. That would only take 2% growth per year, right? That feels a lot less scary than saying we need to add 155,000 people to Vermont. When we look at the history of growth in Vermont before the previous 2 decades, the last 20 years has really been an outlier, actually. So before that, 2% growth per year in terms of the population and housing was actually a pretty normal rate. So how do we tell better stories to make change feel a little less scary down to the local level, because that is where a lot of action happens. We can do all the planning that we want at the state level, but we have to be able to engage with our neighbors and our communities to show up and contribute to these collective targets.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I'll build from that and say something I enjoy about smart growth is, and it's also reflective of this event today, it's a big tent movement. It's a coalition building effort. And, we don't just need planning. We also need development and building and construction. And so that's, and I think the DHCD has done some great work in supporting small scale developers. So developers who are, doing smaller projects, perhaps missing middle, 4-plex, 6-plex, 8-plex. So, it's one thing to have great planning in place, and I think there's a very strong planning context here, but there is a need to better support the development and housing that we need. And I heard our Congresswoman speak recently, and she had some great points around bringing a big coalition together, including, where you don't necessarily agree with everyone in the coalition on every point. And I think that's, that is kind of part of the effort that has to be made to help bring more housing where it's really needed.
Very briefly, I just want to agree with Jake that implementation has been the key, and it's been the shortcoming of a lot of our planning efforts. And in implementation, in particular with infrastructure, I've been involved in local planning in my community in Waitsfield in the Mad River Valley for a couple of decades, and we're 10 years with a water system. We're still trying to get that sewer system and trying to put together the funding package to make that work. And it would be a game changer for the community. It would be a game changer for meeting our housing needs, but it looks less and less likely that we'll be able to accomplish it. And that's a real problem. And when Act 200 was passed, Madeline Kunin was governor, and there was a big budget surplus, and she briefly floated the idea of an infrastructure bank for the state, $100 million to go into community infrastructure, and that got shot down. But had that happened, I just think we'd be having a very different conversation today had we made those investments in infrastructure that we haven't made.
Thank you, Brian. I'd love everyone to take a moment as I go change the slide to write down what do you think is standing in the way of implementation in your communities. I heard people here say money, challenges working across difference, maybe not really clear values around growth, like maybe do we really want to grow? Do I want to grow? Does my town want to grow? And lack of capacity to actually manage the project management of growth. I also heard like lack of confidence. A lot of our towns and communities aren't sure that they can do it. They have the capacity or the know-how. I'm curious what's happening in your towns that is falling in that missing piece between really great growth and actually getting the, really great planning and then the growth or the development that we want to see on the ground. The next question we are going to talk about is something on the screen about what land use policies are working well, and I'm going to put that up and you all think about your answers. Phew, it's only one slide. So we're actually going to talk about these two questions together. These are answers that you all submitted in your surveys about what's working well and what's not working well. So you all, I can read them so that, can you see them? No, okay. So policy and legislative progress is working well. Community engagement and planning is working well. Housing development in walkable areas is good. Infill development, commitment to smart growth principles, and historical development patterns. Katie, those came from the audience in their surveys. Okay, panel, does anyone have a response to, do you think those are working well? Are there things you would add as other things that are working well?
I would say the downtown development is working well in many places in the state. If you look at St. Albans, Winooski, White River Junction, you have infill development, redevelopment going on that really was not happening 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So that's really good. And the other thing I want to point out is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board has made tremendous investments in our downtowns and housing historically, always focusing or almost always focusing on a smart growth framework for making their investments. So that's been a really sensational success story for the state.
We can pass it down. Here's a bias. I had the opportunity to work with the DHCD team on the review of the designation program last year, now community investment program, and I think that is really unique nationally to have such a place-based approach at the state level to direct investment to locations with economic vitality. And also want to give a shout out to the Homes for All program. I think the efforts at the state level to support small-scale developers are something which a lot of other states, are not doing yet. Sorry if you were going to say that.
No. Thanks, Catherine. I would echo Brian on both infill and downtown. I think we're asking more often as a state and communities, how do we make the most of the infrastructure we have without having to build new. So where are those opportunities on existing streets, on existing water and sewer, that vacant lot that we might be able to fit a cottage cluster PUD in, or a subdivision that could occur to allow a new fourplex. And the Home Act made so much more possible within areas served by water and sewers. Duplexes are allowed now statewide, fourplexes and threeplexes on 1/5 acre lots, single-family homes on small lots. That was not possible a few years ago, and I think it's gonna take a while to feel those effects because the real markets are slow to adapt, but it's gonna have a big impact. So that's exciting. We're gonna see that infill. Downtowns are strong in Vermont. They're stronger than they are in many in many places throughout small town America because of the commitment this state has made to downtown and historic tax credits, to fixing up old buildings, to making the most of what we have now. It's like that quote: "Use it up, wear it out, or do without." And Vermont's good at that. I'm also excited and feel a lot of hope about the values that are shifting in local zoning bylaws and subdivision bylaws. We're seeing that modernization inch forward with bylaw modernization grants. Planning commissions are taking the 1970s value of the nuclear family on a large lot and a single family home, and it's adapting to recognize that Vermonters are much more diverse, and we as a nation have many more different family compositions and ways of living than we did in the 1970s. So that's exciting. And last, I'm always inspired by the regional planning commissions. They are leading and collaborating and doing amazing work to push the intensive Act 181 forward and to make sure that implementation is successful. So they deserve a shout out.
So I'll add one quick one in terms of what's working well, which is reputation. Right. A lot of my friends who live in other states, when I ask them about what they think of Vermont, sustainability is often a word that comes to their minds, right? And whether we're living out those values or not, that reputation is there, and we can leverage that as a strength because there are folks that want to participate in that type of thinking in these types of communities. So how do we leverage that reputation and be a steward of it to continue making sure that it is a true representation of who we are?
Thank you all. I am not a land use planner. I'm very new to the world of planning. And I find in listening to you, I have this critic that comes up that's like, okay, great, we have these plans, but in the meantime, there are so many vacant storefronts in the town I live in, this town, which is also our capital. I don't see this infill development happening, and I don't mean to say that I am right. What I mean to say is, do we have a disconnect between the time frame of planning and the time frame of implementation and the sort of need of communities, the need that we feel now? And I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you answer that question because we don't have time right now. But I am going to read out so that you can know what the audience thinks is not working well. Floodplain resilience and climate change, lack of state-level leadership, staff capacity issues across agencies and municipalities, funding and policy misalignment, limited funding and technical assistance for implementation, coupled with very high costs, stakeholder disengagement, regulatory and zoning challenges, lack of public awareness and support, and lack of data to evaluate. So I want you just to hold those. We're gonna go into a group engagement exercise through a Mentimeter. How many people have never used a Mentimeter before? Okay, great. So this is we got a fresh scene here. I'm gonna put it up on the screen, and as I'm doing that, I would love to just see a show of hands of everybody who 100% agrees with these things. So if you 100% agree with what's working well and what's not working well, put your hand up. Okay, so I am excited to see that we're gonna have some good conversations around the table because you don't all agree with each other. What you should do now is, if you have a phone, pull. Oh, okay. I'll get you in 1 second. I want to get people pulling out their phones. So the Mentimeter is an opportunity for you to get some words out on the screen, for us to see kind of a temperature check of how are you following this conversation. How's it tracking for you? So go ahead and try to scan that QR code. I will take your comment, and then if you need help with the QR code, please raise your hand, and then somebody's going to come help you. Okay? If you need help with the QR code, raise your hand. Yes, please, and please say your name so we know.
Sure, I'm Beth Capua, and I'm from Stowe. And before your panel broke up, I wanted to pose this question to them. And I think some of it was covered in your slideshow, but I have a frustration with the state of Vermont with capital S. We create legislation like 147, so we can have growth density in water sewer areas, and then we have 8% of our towns have antiquated water sewer infrastructure and no money behind it. I find it a constant problem with the state of Vermont. Here's these great ideas, everybody's going to compost, and we're going to make a Casella problem. We're not going to really address that extra 30%. And then I also find it very frustrating. I have a son who's an electrician, and I can tell you our schools, which was very frustrating as a parent, everybody go to college, we're going to solve all the problems of my children's world by getting a college degree. And we have less and less skilled labor to do all these great things that we wish to do. So the question to you, of course, is what are your, I mean, I don't know the answer that we seem to, electrician-wise, let's say this, I bet most people don't know that we only practice reciprocity with New Hampshire and Maine. So we need more electricians in the state of Vermont, but they can't come here because we don't allow them to
Got it.
unless we have a license from Maine or New Hampshire. And they can't go other places. My son's about to quit that third year because he's like, but where can I go when we have this national state system where, it's let's say it's political as to why we don't welcome other tradespeople to this state. A, there's no place for them to live.
Totally.
But, so I have a frustration on even a more basic level of we can do all the planning, we can do all the growth, but nobody to build it.
Yeah. Okay.
We have not made that a robust infrastructure. How many people here hang out with HVAC people? I'd say the majority of us here have college degrees. We talk about race division and equity, but we have a class division in this state that's very
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd love to know what each one of us, and we don't have to, it doesn't have to be answered.
Yes.
Does everybody do something in their own lives to welcome people who are carpenters? Do you have them at your dinner table? Do we, as schools, say, because my sons were cast aside because they weren't going to Yale.
Got it.
I live in Stowe. Believe me, you're going to Yale. They have a piece of paper in the English department as to every kid who's a senior and what school they're going to.
Oof, brutal.
If you're blue collar going to the military, you're not on that paper.
I'm sorry.
So I think that's really even the core of our problem is what are we doing to encourage blue-collar trades, honorable professions that they make
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's so much in there that resonates with me. Thank you. If people want to clap, thank you. I really hear in what you're saying, I mean, so much wisdom and also pointing to where are discussions happening, who's participating in those discussions, how are these plans being made, and are they informed by the needs of all of our community members? We saw community engagement as a success on the last slide, and then stakeholder disengagement as a challenge. What's falling in between those two things? How's it going with the QR code? Did everyone get into the Mentimeter? Okay, there's two questions there. One is, what did you hear from the panel that stood out to you as an important consideration? Are both questions up? I have to pull them up. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. Do they have access to both questions at once, or? Got it, okay. Okay, so please go ahead and answer that first question, which is, what did you hear from the panel that stood out to you as an important consideration? And then the next question will be, what did you not hear that should be taken into consideration? Got it, okay. So actually, rather than letting you all reply to that very important question we had from the audience, I'm gonna let people do their Mentimeter. And as you conclude, feel free to address that as well. You want me to scan your QRs for you? Yes, please. Okay, raise your hand if you still need the QR. Ellen needs the QR. Oh, perfect. Okay. Quick, Ellen, quick. Quick, quick. Okay. Okay, so here we go. How do I do this? Yeah. Okay. So you all feel free to just keep rolling in with what stood out to you as an important consideration. We have a couple of people identifying the need for population growth. We're trying to get to 802,000. I saw class warfare up there. That really stood out to me. I see coming up at the bottom of the screen, who is Vermont for? The call for action, not more planning. Here we are at a land use planning summit. How do we turn land use planning into an opportunity for action? Doing, I see. Infrastructure is a first step. It needs to come first. We have a missed opportunity with funding. This, as somebody who has worked with a lot of businesses, like, wow, you can write a lot of plans, but at the end of the day, with 600,000 people in Vermont, it's really hard to make any kind of economies work. Our economies of scale are so challenging here. We've been smart, but we need growth. So how do we lean into the growth side of smarter growth? Money, 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 money. Vermont's history of planning has often been based in exclusion. I want to do a show of hands. How many people agree with that statement? Wow. Okay, I'm sorry? Can you repeat it, please? It was that Vermont's history of planning has often been based in exclusion.
Thank you.
Yes. Can we go to the next Menti? Thank you. Okay. How do we, a lot more about implementation, the missing middle, the class wars, the racial divides. Do Vermont policies support our reputation? We've got some ideas to look into. People are excited to look into what they heard from the panel, the Vermont Futures Project, Massachusetts Housing Ideas, Homes for All. We're working on them. What do we do about housing our unhoused neighbors? Okay, is this live? Have they already had a chance? Yeah. Okay, so what did you not hear? Have you already answered this one? No. Okay, got it. Okay, so what was missing from the panel? Ooh, some things about how do we deal with our past harms, environmental harms like brownfield remediation and redevelopment. We didn't hear a lot from the panel about solutions. What do we do about this implementation gap? Concerns that maybe working lands weren't represented in the panel. Village housing at scale. Sorry, I'm trying to be fair here, but I'm really just like quickly glancing and trying to summarize here. Someone felt that they didn't get to hear about reducing Act 250's reach. Okay, kind of along with Act 250, we didn't hear that much about how is land use planning and building codes for things like environmental permits, building codes and environmental permits, how is that constraining our growth? That goes, I think, pretty close hand in hand with how expensive it is to build things. Planning does not necessarily change how expensive the cost of materials are. We did not hear a lot about NIMBYism when that is normally something we talk very explicitly about. We didn't hear much about renewable energy and efforts to support increased electrification. We didn't hear a lot about how do we raise the foundation for everyone here and everyone we want to welcome here. What does it look like to have a value proposition that invests in people? I may have, sorry if I lost the last sentence there. That's okay. Okay, so all of these comments will be captured. They're all part of the notes that Katie's team will use moving forward. What we don't hear is just as important as what we do hear, and sometimes more important. So as you are moving into your tables, please think about what are you not hearing at the table? What needs to be expressed because no one has yet expressed it? Okay, panelists, you get a chance now to ask the room for help, because they're about to go to their work tables and they're gonna do a lot of good work together. Please, as you close out, can you ask this room, what is one land use related issue? Recognizing now from their Mentimeters that there are a lot of issues that we don't typically classify under land use, but today they got classified under land use. What is one land use related issue that you hope this room is gonna solve? Maybe not today, but starting today. Kevin, do you want to go first?
A couple of years ago, I put a question in the Vermonter poll. It's an annual survey that the Center for Rural Studies at Vermont conducts. And the question I asked was, are you supportive of creating new housing to support population growth at 3 different scales? One was in Vermont, the other one was in your town, and then the third was in your neighborhood. And there was a lot of support for more housing in Vermont. 60% of respondents said yes. In your town, 57.2% of respondents said yes, and then in your neighborhood, it went down to 46.3. It went below that 50% threshold, right? I saw the NIMBYism comment, so I'm responding to that. But this will also turn into a call to action. There are still more yes respondents at the neighborhood scale than no. So 46.3% said yes in your neighborhood, 31% said no, and 22.7% said, I'm not sure. But I want you to walk away knowing that there are more yeses than nos, even if we hear the no voices really loudly. And my call to action is, how can we show up and start to reconfigure policy and processes and even culture to empower the yes voices? I was a participant at the Designation 2050 Summit to reimagine what the designation programs in Vermont can be moving forward to better serve our people in our places. And a crazy idea that I threw out there that I'm gonna keep throwing out there is, how do we flip the script so that the default answer is yes, right? When a proposal gets put forth for development, whether it's smart growth or not, the default answer is no, and often it takes 3 to 5 years before a shovel even hits the ground, if it ever gets to that stage. And we have to make smart growth development easier to do. That's part of the cost. We have to start off by saying, yes, that is where we want to go. And then if things pop up that shift it to the no category, fine. But let's start off by saying yes.
I think one issue that I hope this group will tackle is that smarter planning without smarter investments does not lead to smarter growth. And so how do we get the smarter investments? And to echo or build on what Kevin's saying, how do we get to yes? How do we move away from, I know when I see a development review, to really great plans and regulations that have the upfront process, that really involve the community, that build the necessary trust, and the deliberate implementation that the community can see this is where we're collectively heading, and we've done the process up front. So that's what I'd leave you with.
Oh, do we go in the audience? Or?
Can we let our panelists go and then? Okay, yeah, just after them, we'll.
Something I'll reflect on is I think we're going to be looking at the smart growth principles today. And, everything, that we're talking about and hearing from the audience too, just underscores for me, this is really all about people. It is about welcoming more people to the state. It's also about creating, wonderful environments where people, meet their neighbors, live their lives, and have access to, the training and skills and jobs right close to home. And reading the principles now, it feels a bit more that it's about the buildings, the landscape, this setting, which is a key part of the Vermont brand. But let's take that big picture and bring it to people, and to think about the people, both the people who are here already and future members of the community who will benefit from having more housing in strong locations.
Thanks. Well, I want to wrap up by thanking again Kelly and Ben and Katie and your organizations for putting this together, because it really is an important time in this state. As Jake mentioned, we are rethinking our planning and regulatory and designation programs around smart growth. So the two questions I have are how do we do that right? How do we hold this new land use review board, the regional planning commissions, and our municipalities accountable for implementing smart growth in a way that I think the legislature and the administration intended? And I think some of our planning failures in the past have been a lack of accountability to make sure that the goals that are put in statute are actually being addressed in local and regional plans. So that's an important consideration that I have. The second thing is we mentioned that the downtown program has been pretty successful. We have strengthened our downtowns. We're doing a lot of infill development, and that's one side of the smart growth coin. The other side is the rural lands and the working lands, and I don't think we have been nearly as successful in seeing that our rural scattered, the large lot residential subdivisions, the strip development, we haven't been preventing that from happening. The smart growth hasn't been providing the alternative to that. It's been providing a supplement to that. So how do we really work on the sprawl part of smart growth and discouraging that? Because one thing, as I mentioned, unique to Vermont's smart growth principles is what smart growth isn't, and it isn't sprawl, and that was an important consideration when the principles were put in statute.
Thank you so much to our panel. Can we get a quick round of applause for all of their work? Okay, I hope that you all feel charged up. I have so many things I want to follow up with you all and you all. Most of all, what I heard from this panel is that everything we've designed in terms of our land use policy came from people. And we need to remember that laws are written by people in leadership, people who share their voices and their visions, and you are these people today in this room. So whether you are brand new to land use planning as of this meeting, or you've been working on it for 35 years, please remember the power you hold in your experiences as a member of this Vermont community and your visions of what prosperity and safety and thriving looks like in your community. You don't have to say it in perfect land use planning words. It is the job, in my opinion, of land use planners to understand what our communities need and translate that into planning language. So everyone who is here today, I hope you will step up with all of your courage and bravery to speak your truth from your perspectives, and to start showing how powerful you are and we are. We're gonna do an exercise where we move this room around together. So everyone who's sitting at these front 4 tables, I'm gonna ask you to move your tables this way up to the front of the room about 5 feet. Everyone who's sitting at the back tables, if you can do the same thing to those back tables, and middle tables, if you can be supportive friends and follow the leadership of the front and the back and say, how can I help you? There are just a couple of other things. Oh, if you could land one easel at each table, and then you're gonna have a 10-minute break. As you do that, please meet some new people, and then when you choose the table you're gonna sit at, please sit with people you don't know that well.